The sight of a little girl rummaging through garbage made him stop in his tracks. Her tiny hands sorted through discarded leftovers with practiced efficiency. Her eyes focused solely on finding her next meal. Before he could process what was happening, the millionaire found himself shouting words that would change both their lives forever. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The rain fell in sheets across Seattle, turning Thursday afternoon into a grim tableau of hurried figures and splashing puddles. Downtown bustled with activity as commuters rushed between buildings, umbrellas tilted against the wind, each person focused solely on their destination. None spared a glance for the narrow alley behind Westlake Bakery, where 8-year-old Lily huddled against the brick wall, invisible to the passing world. Her small fingers, red and raw from the cold, sifted through discarded pastry boxes. 3 days had passed since her last proper meal. The gnawing in her stomach had become a constant companion, more reliable than the adults in her life. Lily's once bright eyes were dulled by hunger, her face a canvas of dirt streaks and dried tears. She wore the same faded blue sweater she'd had on when her stepmother had locked her out, claiming she needed to learn gratitude. Karen Whitmore's words still echoed in her mind. "You don't deserve kindness, not after what your mother did." The cruelty in Karen's voice had cut deeper than the winter chill that now seeped through Lily's thin clothing. The child didn't understand what her real mother had done wrong. She barely remembered her. But Karen never let her forget the unnamed sin. A sudden gust drove the rain sideways, forcing Lily deeper into her meager shelter. Her fingers closed around half a muffin, still wrapped in paper. A treasure. She quickly tucked it into her pocket, saving it for later when the hunger became unbearable. At the mouth of the alley, Richard Davenhall cursed under his breath as he ducked away from the main street. The tech mogul hadn't planned on cutting through back passages, but the sudden downpour had forced a detour on his way to an investor meeting. His tailored suit offered little protection against Seattle's determined weather. Richard paused mid-stride when he spotted movement by the dumpsters. At first, he thought it might be a stray animal. Then he saw her, a child, painfully thin, her collarbones visible beneath her soaked sweater. She was methodically picking through garbage, her movements practiced and efficient. Something in her posture, the resigned slump of her shoulders, triggered a memory buried deep in Richard's consciousness. He'd once been small and afraid, though never hungry or homeless. Still, he recognized the isolation that surrounded her like an aura. The philanthropist stood frozen, rainwater streaming down his face. In that moment, watching Lily's trembling hands sort through refuse, Richard felt an unexpected shift in his carefully ordered world. Their eyes met briefly across the alley, hers wary, his stunned with recognition of something he couldn't yet name. Neither knew it then, but their fates had just become irrevocably intertwined. "Hey, what are you doing to that child?" Richard Davenhall's voice thundered across the alley, cutting through the steady patter of Seattle rain. The sound reverberated off brick walls, causing several bakery employees taking out trash to freeze mid-motion. Passers-by on the street turned their heads, drawn by the sudden disruption of urban white noise. The tech mogul strode forward, his expensive shoes splashing through puddles without hesitation. His tailored suit was already damp from the downpour. But he paid it no mind as he approached the small, trembling figure huddled against the dumpster. Lily's wide eyes darted between Richard and the bakery workers, her thin frame tensing as if preparing to flee. "She's just a little girl," Richard said, his voice dropping to a controlled fury as he addressed the staff. "How long has she been coming here?" A young woman in a flour-dusted apron stepped forward nervously. "We've seen her a few times this month," she admitted, unable to meet his gaze. "Sometimes we leave the day-olds in bags on top instead of inside, but the manager said we can't." "You've watched a child dig through garbage for food and did nothing?" Richard interrupted, kneeling beside Lily despite the wet pavement soaking through his trousers. The businessman's normally reserved demeanor had cracked open, revealing something raw and personal beneath. He examined her gently, noting the dirt-streaked face, the hollows beneath her cheekbones, the way her clothes hung from her small frame. "Are you hurt?" he asked softly. Lily remained silent, regarding him with the wary calculation of someone accustomed to adult disappointment. More bakery staff had gathered now, along with a small crowd of onlookers. Someone was filming with their smartphone. In the distance, sirens wailed. Perhaps coincidence, perhaps called by a concerned citizen. "I'm Richard," he said, his voice gentle now. "Would you like something to eat? Real food, not scraps?" The child gave an almost imperceptible nod, her eyes never leaving his face, searching for the inevitable moment when kindness would transform into cruelty. Richard removed his suit jacket and carefully wrapped it around her shoulders. It engulfed her completely, emphasizing how small, how vulnerable she truly was. With a decision that would alter both their lives forever, he carefully lifted Lily into his arms. "I'm calling my lawyer and the authorities," he announced to no one in particular, though his words carried weight in the hushed alley. "This child will never have to search through trash again." As he carried her toward the street, the philanthropist felt a fierce, unexpected protectiveness surge through him. The sirens grew louder, heralding the beginning of a battle neither had anticipated that rain-soaked afternoon. The sterile white walls of the private clinic seemed to close in around Lily as a pediatrician gently examined her trembling form. Richard Davenhall stood nearby, his normally commanding presence softened with concern. The doctor's face grew increasingly grave as she documented each finding: prominent ribs visible beneath thin skin, old bruises in various stages of healing, and the haunted look that spoke of wounds deeper than physical. "Severe malnutrition," the physician murmured, recording her observations, "and signs consistent with prolonged emotional neglect." She glanced at Richard, lowering her voice. "We need to contact Child Protective Services immediately. Do you know anything about her guardianship situation?" The tech mogul shook his head, watching as Lily curled into herself on the examination table. "Nothing yet. She hasn't spoken a word since I found her." The social worker who arrived asked gentle questions, but Lily's eyes, wide and wary, surveyed each adult with the calculation of someone who had learned that trust was dangerous. She pulled the clean blanket tighter around her shoulders, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. "It's okay," Richard said softly, keeping his distance. "No one here will hurt you." But the child's silence spoke volumes about experiences that had taught her otherwise. Meanwhile, across Seattle, news of the incident spread like wildfire. Karen Whitmore sat in her tastefully decorated living room, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her smartphone as she scrolled through the first reports of a wealthy businessman rescuing a homeless child. When she recognized Lily's description, her expression hardened. Within hours, Karen had contacted every major news outlet in the city. Cameras captured her tearful plea as she portrayed herself as a devoted stepmother whose child had been taken by a stranger. "My stepdaughter is vulnerable and easily manipulated," she told reporters, dabbing at carefully manufactured tears. "This man, this Richard Davenhall, took her without my knowledge or consent. What kind of person snatches a child off the street instead of contacting authorities?" The narrative she crafted was compelling. A grieving widow, struggling to raise her late husband's daughter, now victimized by a powerful millionaire with unknown motives. News channels ran with the story, splashing Richard's corporate headshot alongside Karen's weeping face. Back at the clinic, a nurse turned on the television just as Karen's interview aired. Richard watched in disbelief as the woman transformed his act of compassion into something sinister and self-serving. "That's her stepmother?" the doctor asked, glancing toward Lily, who had gone completely still at the sound of Karen's voice. Richard's jaw tightened. "Apparently so," he said, noticing how Lily's fingers had begun to tremble. "But something tells me there's much more to this story." Richard Davenhall's mansion, stood like a glass fortress on Seattle's hillside, its modern architecture offering panoramic views of the city skyline, but little warmth. As he carried Lily through the front door, the 8-year-old girl clutched her tattered sweater, eyes wide with apprehension. The vast foyer, with its minimalist furniture and stark white walls, felt more like a museum than a home. "This is where you'll be staying for now," Richard explained softly, setting her down on a pristine couch. Lily remained frozen, her thin frame barely making an impression on the cushions. When he asked if she was hungry, she offered no response, not even a nod. Mrs. Evelyn Hart appeared from the kitchen, her kind face creased with concern. The housekeeper approached slowly, kneeling to Lily's eye level. "Would you like something warm to drink, dear?" she asked, her voice gentle. Lily's gaze dropped to the floor, her silence a wall between her and these strangers. Over the next 3 days, this pattern continued. The child moved through the mansion like a ghost, accepting food and clean clothes, but offering nothing in return. No words, no smiles, not even tears. At night, Richard would find her curled in a corner of her bedroom, rather than in the bed he'd prepared. "She's protecting herself," Mrs. said. Hart explained as she placed a cup of coffee before him one morning. "Children who've suffered learn that silence is safety." Richard nodded, understanding more than he cared to admit. His own childhood, though privileged, had been marked by emotional abandonment after his mother's death. His father had retreated into work, leaving Richard to navigate loss alone. "I've contacted James Lee," he told Mrs. Hart, his voice low. "I need to know what happened to her, who failed to protect her." The private investigator arrived that afternoon, his weathered face serious as Richard briefed him in the study. "Find everything about her stepmother, Karen Whitmore. Background, finances, any history of complaints or investigations." "This could get complicated," Lee warned, "especially with your public profile." Richard glanced through the doorway, where he could see Lily sitting motionless by the window, watching raindrops trace patterns on the glass. Something about her stillness stirred a resolve in him he hadn't known he possessed. "I don't care about complications," the tech mogul replied, turning back to Lee. "That child was eating from a dumpster while someone was legally responsible for her care. Someone who's probably looking for her right now, not out of concern, but self-interest." He wrote a check with more zeros than most investigations warranted. "Find the truth, James, whatever it costs." As Lee departed, Richard approached Lily hesitantly. He sat beside her without speaking, simply sharing the view of Seattle's rain-washed skyline. For a moment, just a moment, he thought he felt her lean slightly toward him, the first voluntary connection she'd initiated. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. The conference room fell silent as Richard Davenhall faced his board of directors. Their expressions ranged from concern to outright disapproval. "The IPO is 8 weeks away," said Marcus Jennings, tapping his pen against the polished table. "This situation with the child could become a PR nightmare. Investors don't like uncertainty." Richard gazed out at the Seattle skyline, rain streaking the floor-to-ceiling windows. The tech mogul had built his empire from nothing, but now his most important battle wasn't in boardrooms or coding labs. It was for a little girl who still barely spoke. "The company will survive a delayed IPO," he replied firmly. "Lily won't survive going back to that woman." The CFO leaned forward. "We're talking about hundreds of millions in potential losses. Your personal charity project." "She's not a project," Richard cut in, his voice quiet but sharp enough to silence the room. "And this discussion is over." As the board members filed out, his phone buzzed with a message from James Lee. "Found something. Meet at your house tonight." Later that evening, the private investigator spread documents across Richard's kitchen counter while Mrs. Evelyn Hart prepared dinner upstairs for Lily. "Karen Whitmore's history is interesting," James said, pushing forward a stack of papers. "She's been married 3 times, each marriage to increasingly wealthy men. The last one, Lily's father, died under circumstances that were ruled accidental. Richard frowned. You think she— I'm not saying that, James interrupted, but I interviewed neighbors from their old neighborhood. They describe hearing arguments. A child crying frequently. One woman mentioned seeing bruises on Lily's arms. The investigator pulled out more documents. Here's where it gets complicated. The guardianship papers have inconsistencies. Signatures don't match across documents. Dates are altered, and there's no record of legal adoption. Just a hastily processed guardianship after the father's death. Richard's jaw tightened. So she might not even have legal claim to Lily? It's possible. I need to dig deeper. James hesitated. There's more. Karen's been making calls to journalists, spinning a story about you, painting herself as the grieving stepmother whose child was taken by a rich man with savior complex. Richard paced the room, the weight of what he was facing settling on his shoulders. His company, his reputation, his future, all now secondary to protecting a child he barely knew but felt inexplicably responsible for. Keep digging, he told James. Whatever it costs, whatever it takes. Upstairs, through the partially open door, he caught a glimpse of Lily sitting silently as Evelyn brushed her hair. For a moment, their eyes met in the mirror's reflection, a silent understanding passing between them. Some wars were worth fighting, no matter the cost. Mrs. Evelyn Hart moved quietly through the mansion's kitchen, her experienced hands preparing a mug of hot cocoa. The housekeeper had worked for Richard Davenhall for 7 years, but never had the cold, minimalist space felt so empty until Lily arrived. Something about the child's silent presence awakened memories of Emily, the daughter Evelyn had lost to illness 15 years ago. "Would you like marshmallows?" she asked softly, not expecting an answer from the girl who sat curled at the kitchen island, thin fingers tracing patterns on the marble countertop. To her surprise, Lily gave a tiny nod. Progress, Evelyn thought, dropping 3 miniature marshmallows into the steaming liquid. The child wrapped her hands around the warm mug, her eyes briefly meeting the housekeeper's before darting away. Over the following days, Evelyn noticed small changes. Lily began following her during chores, watching intently as she folded laundry or watered the few existing plants. One afternoon, the girl stood transfixed by the washing machine, seemingly comforted by its rhythmic hum. "My Emily loved that sound too," Evelyn said, draping a soft blanket around Lily's shoulders. Said it reminded her of ocean waves. That evening, Richard returned home to find Lily asleep on the sofa, wrapped in the blanket, a half-eaten cookie on the table beside her. The tech mogul's expression softened as he observed this small sign of comfort in his ward. "She's beginning to trust," Evelyn whispered, collecting the empty cocoa mug. The mansion itself began to transform. Richard, usually absorbed in work, started noticing the sterility of his surroundings through Lily's eyes. The following weekend, he surprised everyone by returning with potted plants, ferns, peace lilies, and a small lemon tree for the kitchen. "Children need growing things around them," he explained awkwardly when Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Family photographs appeared next. Richard's parents, his estranged sister, even a framed picture of Evelyn with her late husband. The cold glass and steel surfaces softened with throw pillows and colorful rugs. The house that had functioned merely as Richard's sleeping quarters was slowly becoming a home. The first time they heard Lily laugh, a tiny, surprised sound when Evelyn's attempt at pancake flipping ended with batter on the ceiling, both adults froze, afraid to acknowledge the milestone and break the spell. But the sound returned, tentative at first, then more frequent. It echoed through halls that had known only silence and business calls, transforming the very air of the mansion. For Richard, who had built walls around himself as sturdy as those of his home, these changes were both terrifying and necessary. "She's healing this place," Evelyn said one evening as they watched Lily sleeping peacefully. "Perhaps," Richard replied quietly. "She's healing all of us." The mansion's corridors stretched like a labyrinth before Lily as she wandered aimlessly one Tuesday afternoon. The 8-year-old had grown slightly more comfortable exploring Richard Davenhall's home, though she still moved with the cautious steps of someone expecting to be scolded at any moment. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, creating pools of warmth on the polished hardwood floors that Lily carefully stepped into, savoring their comfort. As she turned down an unfamiliar hallway, a door left slightly ajar caught her attention. Peeking inside, she discovered a spacious room bathed in golden afternoon light. At its center stood a magnificent grand piano, its ebony surface gleaming like a mirror. Lily froze, memories stirring of a piano she'd once seen at a school recital before Karen had pulled her from classes. Drawn by an impulse she couldn't name, the child approached the instrument with reverence. Her small fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. Finally, she pressed a single white key. The clear, pure note rang through the room, vibrating in the air around her. Lily closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her like a gentle wave. From the doorway, Richard watched silently. The tech mogul had been passing by when he noticed the child's discovery. Something in her posture, the way her shoulders relaxed as the note filled the space, stirred a recognition in him. For the first time since bringing her home, he saw a spark of genuine interest in her eyes, replacing the constant wariness that had become so familiar. "Would you like to learn?" he asked softly, careful not to startle her. Lily's head snapped up, her body tensing as she stepped back from the piano. But she didn't flee, and Richard counted that as progress. That evening, after Lily had gone to bed, he made several calls. By Friday, he had arranged for Eliza Chen, a renowned pianist who owed him a favor, to visit the mansion twice weekly. Mrs. Evelyn Hart helped prepare a schedule that wouldn't overwhelm the child, understanding better than anyone how fragile Lily's newfound comfort remained. "Music speaks when words cannot," the housekeeper told Richard as they finalized the arrangements. "My daughter found her voice through violin before." She didn't finish the sentence, but Richard understood the weight of what remained unsaid. The lessons would begin discreetly. No pressure, no expectations. Just an opportunity, a door left open. Richard hoped that through the language of music, Lily might find a path back to her voice, a way to express what had been locked inside her since he found her behind that bakery, searching through garbage for something to eat. As he signed the final arrangements for the lessons, he realized he was humming that single, perfect note Lily had played, the first note of what he hoped would become her healing symphony. Breaking news: tech billionaire kidnaps child for publicity stunt. The headline blazed across the television screen as Richard Davenhall quickly muted the volume. Karen Whitmore had escalated her media campaign to unprecedented levels, appearing tearful on 3 different morning shows in a single day. Her carefully crafted image of a distraught stepmother desperately searching for her stolen child had captivated viewers nationwide. "She's manipulating public perception masterfully," James Lee observed, dropping a folder of documents on Richard's desk. The private investigator had been working tirelessly, his normally calm demeanor showing signs of fatigue. "But we're finding cracks in her story." Outside the mansion's gates, photographers camped in growing numbers. They captured every movement, every visitor, hoping to glimpse the little girl at the center of the storm. Social media hashtags trended hourly, some supporting Richard, others condemning him as a predator using Lily for image rehabilitation. Richard drew the curtains closed, creating a sanctuary within. He had instructed Mrs. Evelyn Hart to keep all newspapers out of sight and television limited to carefully selected programs. The housekeeper had become fiercely protective, turning away reporters with a steel in her voice that surprised even Richard. "Lily doesn't need to see this circus," Richard told his lawyer over the phone, pacing the study. "I won't have her traumatized further. Meanwhile, James was assembling a troubling picture of Karen's past. Bank statements showed large withdrawals coinciding with Lily's doctor appointments that never appeared in medical records. Signatures on school documents didn't match. Most damning were the guardianship papers themselves, notarized by someone whose license had expired 3 years before the signing. "She's been building this facade for years," James explained, spreading photographs across the desk. "These aren't impulsive lies. This is calculated deception." That evening, as rain drummed against the windows, Richard found Lily sitting cross-legged in the library, absorbed in a picture book. For a moment, watching her peaceful concentration, the outside chaos seemed distant and meaningless. "Are you hungry?" he asked gently. She nodded, still not entirely comfortable with verbal responses. As they walked toward the kitchen, a camera flash briefly illuminated the room. A photographer had somehow scaled the garden wall. Richard quickly guided Lily away, his jaw tight with anger. Later, after ensuring she was safely asleep, Richard called his sister for the first time in years. "I need your help," he admitted, voice low in the darkened hallway. "This isn't just about me anymore." The war for Lily's future was escalating, but within the mansion's walls, Richard was building something Karen couldn't touch. A foundation of stability, trust, and genuine care. The mansion was quiet at 3 in the morning. Lily padded down the hallway in her socks, unable to sleep as memories of dumpster diving haunted her dreams. The polished wooden floors felt strange beneath her feet, so different from the cold concrete she'd known at Karen's apartment. She paused outside Richard Davenhall's office, the door slightly ajar. A soft lamp cast a warm glow inside. Curiosity pulled her forward, and she peeked through the gap. The room was empty, but something on the desk caught her eye. A silver frame she hadn't noticed during her daytime explorations. Lily slipped inside, her small frame barely disturbing the stillness. She approached the desk cautiously, as if expecting Karen to materialize and punish her for snooping. The photograph showed a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Something about her face made Lily's chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't name. "That's my mother," came Richard's voice from the doorway. The child jumped, nearly knocking over the frame. Her eyes widened with fear, expecting anger. Instead, the tech mogul entered slowly and knelt beside her. "It's okay. You're not in trouble." His voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "Her name was Eleanor. She died when I was 15. Lily's fingers hovered over the glass, not quite touching. The woman in the photo had the same crinkles around her eyes that Richard got when he smiled, which wasn't often. "She looks kind," Lily whispered, so quietly that Richard almost missed it. He stared at her, momentarily frozen. It was the first time she had spoken since arriving at his home 4 weeks ago. Mrs. Hart had warned him to be patient, that trauma could silence even the most talkative children. "She was," he replied carefully, afraid that saying too much might scare Lily back into silence. "Very kind." Lily's gaze returned to the photograph. "My mom had a smile like that. I think. I don't remember so good anymore." Richard's throat tightened. He knew from James Lee's investigation that Lily's biological mother had died when she was 3, leaving her with a father who soon remarried Karen Whitmore. "Sometimes I forget her face too," he admitted. Lily turned to him then, her eyes meeting his directly for the first time. "Thank you," she said, the words fragile but clear. "For what?" he asked. "For not making me go back." Richard nodded, understanding the weight of those simple words. This wasn't just gratitude. It was the first tentative bridge across the chasm of distrust Karen had created. "You're safe here, Lily," he promised, "for as long as you want to stay." She didn't smile. Not yet. But something in her posture relaxed slightly. It was a beginning, small but significant, like the first note she'd played on his mother's piano. The grand ballroom of the Seattle Arts Center glittered with chandeliers and the polished jewelry of the city's wealthiest residents. Richard Davenhall had spared no expense for this charity gala, transforming the venue into an elegant showcase for children's education initiatives. Behind the scenes, he adjusted his bow tie nervously, more concerned with Lily's well-being than the $400,000 already pledged. "Are you sure you want to play tonight?" Richard asked gently, kneeling to meet the 8-year-old's eyes. "No one will be upset if you change your mind." Lily nodded, her small fingers clutching the sheet music Mrs. Evelyn Hart had helped her practice. The housekeeper had become a steadying presence in her life, spending hours beside the grand piano in Richard's mansion, offering encouragement with each hesitant note. "She's ready," Evelyn whispered to her employer. "This might be exactly what she needs." As the evening progressed, Richard addressed the crowd with practiced charm, though his gaze frequently drifted to where Lily sat, her new blue dress making her look less frail than when he'd found her behind that bakery months ago. The tech mogul spoke passionately about educational inequality, carefully avoiding any mention of his personal situation, despite the whispers that followed him through the room. "And now," he announced, his voice softening, "a special performance from a remarkable young musician." The crowd's polite applause felt thunderous to Lily as she approached the gleaming black piano. Her legs trembled beneath her dress as she climbed onto the bench, looking impossibly small against the instrument. She caught sight of Richard's encouraging nod from the side of the stage. Her first notes wavered, uncertain and fragile. A few guests exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of pity and discomfort. But then something shifted. With each press of the keys, Lily's shoulders straightened, almost imperceptibly. The melody, a simple but moving piece she had selected herself, grew stronger, more confident. The room fell silent, except for the music. Even the servers paused, trays balanced in their hands, caught in the spell of the child's unexpected talent. When the final note faded, there was a moment of complete stillness before the applause erupted. Genuine, spontaneous, and thunderous. Richard watched as several guests dabbed at their eyes with cocktail napkins. The child took a small, awkward bow before hurrying back to his side, her face flushed with accomplishment rather than shame. "That was beautiful," he whispered, squeezing her hand. For the remainder of the evening, the whispers following them changed tone completely. No longer was Richard Davenhall the eccentric billionaire with questionable motives. Now he was the man who had given a remarkable child a chance to shine. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, and Seattle's elite mingled in formal attire, champagne flutes in hand. Richard Davenhall watched from across the room as Lily received gentle compliments on her performance. Her small face flushed with pride. The tech mogul allowed himself a rare smile, noting how different she looked now, no longer the frightened child from the alley, though still cautious around strangers. The peaceful moment shattered when the grand doors burst open. Karen Whitmore strode in, designer dress flowing behind her like battle armor. 2 cameramen flanked her, equipment already rolling. Heads turned as conversations died mid-sentence. "There she is," Karen's voice carried across the ballroom. "My poor, manipulated stepdaughter." Richard moved swiftly toward Lily, who had frozen at the sound of her stepmother's voice. Mrs. Evelyn Hart, who had been standing nearby, placed a protective hand on the child's shoulder. "This man has stolen my daughter for publicity," Karen announced, playing perfectly to the cameras. "Look at this spectacle, parading her around like some charity mascot." Security personnel approached, but Richard gestured them to wait. He knelt beside Lily, speaking softly. "You're safe, I promise." Karen advanced through the stunned crowd. "Lily, darling, it's time to come home. This has gone on long enough." Her smile never reached her eyes as she extended manicured fingers toward the child. Lily's breathing quickened. The room seemed to hold its collective breath as the little girl looked between Karen and Richard. Then, with unexpected clarity, she stepped behind Richard, gripping the back of his jacket with white knuckles. "I see what you're doing," Karen hissed, dropping the maternal act momentarily. "You've turned her against me." Cameras clicked frantically. A society columnist captured the moment. Lily pressed her face against Richard's shoulder, her expression a mixture of fear and determination. "Mrs. Whitmore," Richard said evenly, standing to his full height while keeping Lily close, "this is hardly the place. My legal team will contact yours." "The public deserves to know how you've manipulated this situation," Karen insisted, voice rising theatrically. "A convenient orphan for a billionaire's image rehabilitation." Several guests murmured disapprovingly at Karen's display. Richard's sister, who had been watching from nearby, stepped forward. "I think you should leave," she told Karen firmly. "You're upsetting the child." As security finally escorted a protesting Karen from the ballroom, Lily remained clutching Richard's hand. A photographer captured the image, the frightened but resolute child holding tight to her protector as chaos swirled around them. By morning, that photograph would appear on news sites nationwide, captioned, "The picture worth 1,000 words." Public opinion, once divided, began to shift decisively in Richard and Lily's favor. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Karen Whitmore's legal team filed the custody lawsuit. Her perfectly rehearsed tears glistened for the cameras waiting outside. This wasn't about motherly love. It was about access to Richard Davenhall's fortune and extending her 15 minutes of fame. "She's exploiting the child," Richard muttered to his attorney as they reviewed the filing. The tech mogul's jaw tightened, his fingers drumming against the mahogany conference table. He had expected this move, but the timing still caught him off guard. Legal teams from both sides mobilized with military precision. Richard's lawyers gathered evidence of Lily's improved health and emotional well-being, while Karen's team crafted a narrative of a wealthy man using a vulnerable child for positive publicity ahead of his company's IPO. "Mr. Davenhall has no experience with children," Karen told reporters, dabbing at dry eyes. "He's using my stepdaughter as a prop to soften his image." The statement made headlines across Seattle, planting seeds of doubt in the public consciousness. The battle intensified when Marjorie Winters, a veteran social worker assigned to the case, arrived at Richard's mansion. Though professional in demeanor, her questions revealed bias. "And how many hours do you actually spend with Lily?" she asked, pen poised over her notepad. "Between your business commitments and social obligations?" Richard noticed how she emphasized social obligations while glancing disapprovingly at the mansion's opulence. Mrs. Evelyn Hart sensed the hostility too, hovering protectively near Lily during the interview. "I've restructured my entire schedule around her needs," Richard answered carefully. But Marjorie's report later characterized him as detached and delegating childcare to staff. James Lee discovered that Marjorie had attended the same church as Karen for years, a connection she had failed to disclose. "She's in Karen's pocket," the investigator confirmed, sliding photographs across Richard's desk, showing the two women in conversation weeks before the case assignment. The obstacles multiplied. Anonymous complaints to Child Protective Services, leaked concerns about Richard's long work hours, carefully orchestrated paparazzi shots of Karen visiting children's hospitals. One evening, Richard found Lily sitting on the window seat, small fingers tracing raindrops on the glass. "Am I going back?" she whispered, her first full sentence in days. Richard knelt beside her. "No," he promised. "Not ever." Later that night, he called an emergency meeting with his legal team. "I don't care what it costs," he told them, voice steady with resolve. "Toll in every favor, find every fact. We're not backing down." As the lawyers filed out, Richard remained at his desk, staring at a photograph of Lily at the piano. The war for her future had only just begun. The manila envelope sat innocuously on Richard Davenhall's desk, unmarked except for his name scrawled in hurried handwriting. His assistant had found it slipped under the office door that morning, with no record of who had delivered it. Richard tapped his fingers against the smooth surface of his mahogany desk, hesitant to open what could be another threat or accusation from Karen's camp. When he finally slit the envelope open, several photocopied documents slid out. His breath caught as he examined them. Birth certificates, guardianship papers, court filings, all bearing inconsistencies and clear signs of tampering. The most damning, Karen Whitmore had never legally completed Lily's adoption process. Instead, she had falsified signatures and backdated documents to create the illusion of legal guardianship. "James," Richard said into his smartphone, his voice tight with controlled emotion, "I need you in my office, now." The private investigator arrived within the hour, studying the papers with practiced eyes. "Someone inside the system helped compile these," James Lee concluded, adjusting his glasses. "The question is, who's our anonymous friend?" Richard paced by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seattle's skyline. "Does it matter? This proves what we suspected. Karen has no legal right to Lily." "It matters," James replied carefully. "If these were obtained illegally, they could hurt our case more than help." That evening, Richard's legal team gathered in his home office while Lily practiced piano with Mrs. Hart in another wing of the mansion. The attorneys examined each document, building a strategy to legally verify the information without revealing their anonymous source. "This changes everything," said the lead attorney, a woman who had fought custody battles for 25 years. "But we need to tread carefully. Karen will claim entrapment or fabrication." Richard watched rain streak down the windows, thinking of the little girl who had suffered years of neglect under Karen's roof. "I don't care what it costs or what strings we need to pull. Find a way to make this admissible." The team worked through the night, making calls to court clerks and records offices across 3 states. By dawn, they had confirmed enough discrepancies to request a formal investigation into Karen's guardianship claims. As Richard finally rested, he knew the coming days would bring chaos. Karen's carefully constructed facade would crumble publicly, and the media frenzy would intensify. The stakes had never been higher, not just for his company's reputation or his personal vindication, but for Lily's future. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin. Every secret, every lie Karen had built her life upon, was about to unravel in the harsh light of public scrutiny. James Lee arrived at Richard Davenhall's mansion late one evening, his weathered face betraying the weight of his discoveries. The private investigator requested a private meeting, away from Lily's curious ears. As rain pattered against the windows, he spread several documents across Richard's mahogany desk. "I've found something you need to see," James said, his voice low. "Lily isn't Karen's stepdaughter, at least not in the way we thought." Richard leaned forward, brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "Karen's late husband, Edward Whitmore, was married before. His first wife was a woman named Margaret Collins, a talented musician and philanthropist." James slid forward a faded photograph of a gentle-faced woman at a piano. "Margaret died in childbirth. The baby survived." Richard's eyes widened as understanding dawned. Lily is Margaret's daughter. Yes, and Karen was Edward's secretary before becoming his second wife. She always envied Margaret's status and talents. The investigator pointed to marriage certificates and birth records. After Edward died in that car accident 5 years ago, Karen falsified guardianship documents to maintain control of Lily. "But why keep her at all?" Richard asked, struggling to comprehend such cruelty. "Money," James replied simply. "Edward left a trust fund for Lily that Karen can access as her guardian. But there's more. Margaret's family had been searching for Lily for years. Karen deliberately kept them away, changing addresses, even Lily's last name." Richard stared at the photograph, noticing the resemblance between Margaret and Lily, the same delicate features, the same hands meant for creating music. Suddenly, Lily's natural talent at the piano made perfect sense. It was in her blood. "This explains everything," Richard whispered. "The neglect, the cruelty." Karen resented Lily because she was living proof of Edward's love for another woman. The tech mogul stood and walked to the window, watching raindrops trace paths down the glass. His resolve hardened. Karen Whitmore hadn't just been neglectful, she had systematically attempted to erase a child's identity and heritage. "Can you locate Margaret's family?" he asked. James nodded. "Already working on it. There's a grandmother in Portland and an aunt in Vancouver." Richard turned, determination etched across his face. "This changes everything about our legal strategy. Karen didn't just mistreat Lily, she committed fraud." That night, after James departed, Richard checked on Lily. She slept peacefully, clutching the blanket Mrs. Hart had given her. Looking at her, Richard felt a renewed purpose. This child deserved to know her true story, to connect with her mother's legacy, to understand that the music flowing from her fingers was her birthright. "You'll have a family who loves you," he whispered. "I promise." Richard Davenhall had never considered himself an investigator, but for Lily's sake, he'd become one. Late into the night, he pored over financial documents James Lee had obtained through his connections. The tech mogul's eyes widened as patterns emerged from the seemingly innocent transactions. "She's been siphoning money for years," Richard muttered to himself, tracing Karen Whitmore's elaborate scheme. The Children's Education Foundation she publicly championed had become her personal piggy bank. Nearly $2 million had disappeared into offshore accounts and funded her designer wardrobe, exotic vacations, and cosmetic procedures. The following morning, Richard met James in a quiet corner of a downtown cafe. "We need to be careful how we handle this," the private investigator cautioned, sliding a USB drive across the table. "This evidence could change everything." Richard nodded, his fingers closing around the small device. "It's not about revenge. It's about protecting Lily." 3 days later, the Seattle Tribune published a devastating exposé. Though the source remained anonymous, the evidence was irrefutable. Bank statements, falsified reports, and damning emails from Karen herself. The story spread like wildfire through news outlets and social media. Mrs. Evelyn Hart was preparing breakfast when she saw the headline. "Oh my," she whispered, glancing toward the stairs where Lily was still sleeping. The housekeeper knew this storm would affect the child, but perhaps it was necessary thunder. By afternoon, Karen's phone rang incessantly. Donors withdrew support, society friends canceled lunch dates, and her attorney left increasingly desperate voicemails. The woman who had cultivated her image as Seattle's charitable socialite now found herself labeled as a thief. At his office, Richard received an unexpected visit from his sister. "I saw the news," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Was this your doing?" He met her gaze steadily. "Justice takes many forms." She nodded slowly, understanding the unspoken message. "How's Lily handling it?" "She doesn't know yet. I'm trying to shield her from the worst of it." Meanwhile, Karen's carefully constructed world continued to unravel. Credit cards were declined at her favorite boutique. The charity board voted unanimously to remove her. Even her doorman, once eager to assist, now avoided eye contact. That evening, as Richard helped Lily with her mathematics homework, he noticed a new steadiness in her hands. The child who once trembled at sudden movements now concentrated on equations with quiet confidence. Perhaps she sensed the shifting tides of fortune, the invisible balance being restored. Outside, rain washed Seattle's streets clean. While inside the mansion, a small family formed in the aftermath of a storm neither had anticipated. The doorbell rang at Richard Davenhall's mansion on a crisp Saturday morning. Richard opened the door to find a woman with familiar eyes staring back at him. "Hello, Richard. It's been a while," said Catherine Davenhall, his sister. 5 years of silence between them dissolved in an awkward hug. Catherine had criticized her brother's emotional detachment for years, calling him too wrapped up in success to care about people. But when she saw the media circus surrounding Lily's case, something shifted. The brother she knew, brilliant but distant, was fighting for a child with everything he had. "I've been following the case," she said, settling into the living room. "Karen Whitmore is ruthless. You need someone who understands how to fight her kind of battle." Richard nodded, grateful yet cautious. "What changed your mind about me?" "People don't change their entire lives for publicity stunts," Catherine replied, watching Lily playing in the garden through the window. "I was wrong about you." Catherine, a former public relations executive, immediately began working her contacts. She arranged interviews with sympathetic journalists, countering Karen's narrative with carefully crafted stories that highlighted the truth without exploiting Lily's trauma. During court proceedings, she sat beside Lily, holding her hand when the girl trembled. "I'm your aunt," she whispered once. "That means I'm on your team forever." The child's tentative smile was worth every difficult conversation with her brother. Meanwhile, at Richard's company, 23-year-old Maya Chen noticed Lily during a Bring Your Child to Work day. The tech intern recognized something in the girl's watchful eyes, the same wariness she'd carried after years in foster care. "Want to see something cool?" Maya asked, showing Lily a simple coding program that created colorful patterns. The girl's eyes widened with interest. With Richard's permission, Maya began teaching Lily basic coding after school. "Computers make sense," Maya explained. "They do exactly what you tell them to do. Not like people." Lily nodded solemnly, understanding completely. "I was scared of everything when I was your age," the intern confided. "But coding gave me control when nothing else did." Under Maya's guidance, Lily created her first program, a digital piano that played notes when she typed letters. Mrs. Evelyn Hart found them laughing together as colorful notes danced across the screen. Richard watched from the doorway, struck by how these unexpected allies had formed a protective circle around Lily. His sister, once his harshest critic, now fiercely defended them both. A young employee who could have remained uninvolved instead shared her own healing journey. For the first time in years, Richard didn't feel alone in his battle. The war against Karen Whitmore would be fought not just in courtrooms, but in the court of public opinion, and now they had warriors on every front. The hashtag #LilyStrong began with a single post, a grainy photograph of Lily playing the piano at Richard Davenholt's charity gala, her small frame dwarfed by the grand instrument. Within 48 hours, it had been shared over 2 million times. "I never thought my daughter's story would reach beyond Seattle," Richard confessed to his sister as they scrolled through thousands of comments. The tech mogul, usually composed in business meetings, found himself overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. What began as Lily's personal battle transformed into a national conversation about child welfare. Parents shared stories of their own children rescued from neglect. Former foster kids, now adults, posted testimonials about the system's failures and occasional triumphs. Even celebrities began sharing their own childhood traumas, lending their platforms to amplify the movement. The tech intern who had been teaching Lily coding showed her the positive comments one afternoon. "Look," she said, pointing to the screen, "all these people care about what happens to you." Lily's eyes widened as she scrolled through messages from children her age who had experienced similar hardships. "Are they all like me?" she asked, her voice still soft from months of silence. "Everyone has different stories," the intern explained, "but they all understand what it's like to feel invisible." For the first time, Lily began to see her experience not as something shameful to hide, but as a story that mattered. That evening, she asked Richard if she could respond to some messages. With Mrs. Evelyn Hart watching protectively nearby, Lily dictated simple thank you notes to supporters. Meanwhile, James Lee compiled a digital dossier of public responses, presenting it to Richard's legal team. "The court can't ignore this level of scrutiny," the investigator noted. "Every judge knows the world is watching." Karen Whitmore's attorney advised her to maintain a low profile as public sentiment turned against her. Undeterred, she attempted to launch a counter-narrative, claiming to be a victim of Richard's wealth and influence. Her efforts backfired spectacularly when former employees came forward with accounts of her cruelty. Child welfare organizations across the country reported increased donations and volunteer applications. Lawmakers in 3 states proposed Lily's Law, aimed at strengthening protections for vulnerable children and increasing penalties for guardians who falsified documentation. "You've started something important," Richard told Lily, as they sat together on the window seat overlooking Seattle's skyline. She looked up from her computer, where she'd been learning to code a simple game. "I didn't do anything special," she whispered. "Sometimes," he replied, "being brave enough to tell the truth is the most special thing anyone can do." The courtroom fell silent as Lily approached the witness stand. Her small frame seemed even tinier against the imposing wooden furniture. But there was a new steadiness in her steps that hadn't been there 3 months ago. Richard Davenhall watched from his seat, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles turned white. Mrs. Evelyn Hart sat beside him, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "Please state your name for the record," the judge said gently. "Lily," she replied, her voice soft but clear in the hushed room. Cameras clicked in word as the 8-year-old settled into the chair. The courtroom was packed with reporters, legal teams, and spectators who had followed the case that had captivated Seattle and beyond. Karen Whitmore sat at the defendant's table, her perfectly composed expression betraying only the slightest twitch when Lily's eyes briefly met hers. "Lily, can you tell us about living with Mrs. Whitmore?" asked Richard's attorney. The child took a deep breath. "She made me sleep in the laundry room when I was bad," Lily began. "But I was always that," she said. "I wasn't allowed to eat with her. Once, she paused. "Sometimes I didn't eat for days." A collective murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge called for order. "And what happened when you were hungry?" the attorney continued. "I looked for food outside, in trash cans." Lily's simple words landed like stones in still water. "That's when Mr. Richard found me." Karen's attorney objected repeatedly, but the damage was done. When shown photographs of the laundry room where she'd slept, Lily identified the thin blanket she'd used, the bucket she'd been given instead of bathroom access at night. The most damning moment came when James Lee's evidence was presented. Karen had never legally adopted Lily, falsifying documents after her husband's death to access his estate, which included a trust for the child. "She told me my real mom didn't want me," Lily said, her voice breaking. "But Mr. Richard showed me pictures of her. She loved me." Karen's carefully constructed facade crumbled visibly. When her turn came to testify, her rehearsed story of maternal concern collapsed under cross-examination. The embezzlement evidence from the Children's Foundation was introduced, sealing her fate. As Lily stepped down from the stand, she walked not back to her seat, but directly to Richard. The tech mogul opened his arms, and the child stepped into his embrace, burying her face against his shoulder. Photographers captured the moment, not as an invasion, but as testimony to something genuine amid the courtroom's calculated performances. In that embrace, without words, the nation witnessed the truth. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Eleanor Winters delivered her verdict, her voice unwavering. "In light of the overwhelming evidence presented, this court finds Karen Whitmore unfit for guardianship. All parental rights are hereby terminated." The gavel struck with finality, echoing through the chamber like thunder after a long storm. Karen Whitmore's face contorted with rage as security escorted her from the courtroom. The woman who had once wielded her social status like a weapon now faced criminal charges for embezzlement and child neglect. Her carefully constructed facade had crumbled completely, leaving nothing but the truth exposed for all to see. Lily sat beside Richard Davenhall, her small hand clutching his. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but unlike the tears of her past, these carried relief and hope. The tech mogul squeezed her hand gently, his own eyes glistening with emotion he no longer tried to hide. "It's over," he whispered. "You're safe now." 3 weeks later, in the same courthouse, but under vastly different circumstances, Richard officially became Lily's father. Mrs. Evelyn Hart stood nearby, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, as the judge pronounced them family in the eyes of the law. The housekeeper had prepared a celebration dinner waiting at home, complete with Lily's favorite chocolate cake. Richard's sister arrived with armfuls of gifts, her previous skepticism replaced by wholehearted support. "I always knew my brother had a heart," she told reporters waiting outside. "He just needed the right person to help him find it." The story captivated the nation. When the prestigious morning show American Daybreak requested an exclusive interview, Richard hesitated, protective of Lily's privacy. It was Lily herself who insisted they accept. "I want other kids like me to know they can be brave too," she explained, her voice growing stronger with each passing day. During the interview, millions watched as Lily, dressed in a blue dress with her hair neatly braided, spoke about her journey from hunger to hope. The interviewer asked what she wanted to be when she grew up. "A software developer like my dad," she answered without hesitation, "but also someone who helps kids who don't have anybody." Sitting beside her on the studio couch couldn't contain his pride. The man once known only for his business acumen was now recognized for something far more valuable, showing that family could be found in the most unexpected circumstances. As they left the studio, hand in hand, photographers captured what would become an iconic image. A father and daughter walking toward the future, both forever changed by a chance encounter in a rainy alley. 8 months had passed since the courtroom battle, and Seattle's notorious gray skies had given way to an unusually bright spring. The transformation in the weather seemed to mirror the change in Lily herself. No longer the trembling child who scavenged for scraps behind a downtown bakery, she now moved through Richard Davenhall's mansion with confident steps, her once hollow cheeks filled with health and frequent laughter. On this particular Sunday morning, piano music drifted through the open windows of what had once been a sterile showcase home. Richard sat in the garden, sipping coffee while reviewing documents for his company's latest educational initiative. He paused, listening to Lily's playing, no longer hesitant but flowing with emotion and technical skill that surprised her teachers. "She's quite the prodigy," Mrs. Evelyn Hart remarked, setting down a tray of freshly baked cookies. The housekeeper had blossomed too, finding in Lily the daughter she had lost years before. "She's healing," Richard replied simply, his normally reserved expression softening. Inside, Lily finished her practice and moved to her computer, where lines of code filled the screen. The young tech intern from Richard's company had discovered her aptitude for programming during their weekly sessions, and now she was building her own simple games, digital worlds where she controlled the outcomes, unlike the chaos of her early life. Richard's sister arrived for their weekly family lunch, carrying art supplies for her niece. The relationship that had once been fractured by emotional distance was now one of the strongest anchors in their unconventional family. "Have you seen the Foundation's new enrollment numbers?" she asked, referring to the educational program they had established for vulnerable children, inspired by Lily's journey. Later that evening, as sunset painted the Seattle skyline in hues of orange and pink, Lily and Richard walked along the garden path. She pointed out plants she had helped Mrs. Hart cultivate, naming each variety with pride. The child who had once been mute now spoke freely, her voice growing stronger with each passing day. "I had a dream about her again," Lily said quietly, referring to Karen Whitmore, who was now serving time for embezzlement and child endangerment. "And how did you feel?" Richard asked, the techniques from their family therapy sessions becoming second nature. "Not scared anymore," she answered, reaching for his hand. "Just sad for her." Their journey had proven that the war against cruelty could be won, not through wealth or power alone, but through patience, truth, and the unwavering courage to care. As they walked back toward the house, now filled with photographs, music, and the evidence of lives intertwined by choice rather than chance, the mansion stood as testament to what could be built from the ruins of broken beginnings.